deaths of the winter fever were recorded faithfully by Septon Eustace. It took a great deal of care to keep a record of the last words of every great lord and noble lady who lost their lives. The fool Mushroom, in his account of events, also names the dead as well, but spent much more time on the follies of those still living, such as the homely squire who convinced the pretty bedmaid to yield her virtue to him by telling her he had the flush, and in 4 days he would be dead, and he would die without ever knowing love. This rather simple ploy proved so successful that he returned to it with 6 other girls, but when he failed to die, they began to talk to one another, and the squire's scheme was unravelled. Mushroom attributes his own survival to alcohol. If I drank sufficient wine, I reasoned I might not never know I was sick. Every fall from dawn to the wall knows that things you don't know can't hurt you. During those long, dark winter days, 2 very unlikely heroes came briefly to the fore. One of them, and perhaps the most unexpected, was the former Maester Orwyle, whose jailers had freed him from his cell after many of the other maesters in the Red Keep had been laid low by the fever and were unable to perform their duties. Old age, fear, and long confinement had left him a shell of the man that he had been during the Dance of the Dragons, and his cures and potions proved no more effective than those of the other maesters that he himself was trying to save. Orwyle worked tirelessly to help those he could ease the passing of, but also those he could not. The other hero, to the astonishment of all, was the young King Aegon himself. To the horror and dismay of the Kingsguard, Aegon spent his days visiting the sick of the Red Keep, often sat with them for hours at a time, sometimes even holding their hand in his own, or soothing their fevered brows with cool damp cloths, with no fear himself of catching the deadly fever. Though King Aegon hardly ever spoke a word, he did share his silence with them and listened as they told him stories of their lives, begging him for forgiveness or boasting of conquest, kindness, and children. Most of those he visited did die, but those who lived would afterwards attribute their survival to the touch of the king's healing hands. If indeed there is some magic in a king's touch, as in the wise tales the small folk tend to believe, it failed when it was needed the most. The last bedside visited by Aegon III was that of Sir Tyland Lannister, the Hand of the King. Through the city's darkest days of the fever, Sir Tyland had remained in the Tower of the Hand, striving day and night against the stranger. Though blind and maimed, he suffered no more than just exhaustion, almost to the last. But as cruel fate would have it, when the worst of the fever was past and new cases of it had dropped away to almost nothing, when life had started to return to the Red Keep and the streets of King's Landing, on a cold, brisk winter's morning, Sir Tyland commanded his serving men to close a window. "It's very cold in here," he said, though the fire in the hearth was blazing, and the windows were already closed, and the room, noted by one of the serving boys, as hot as the Red Keep's kitchens. Sir Tyland declined and worsened very quickly after that. The fever managed to take his life in 2 days instead of the usual 4, with the maesters putting the swiftness of his passing down to its already weakened physical state due to his injuries, plus the exhaustion from having spent the last few weeks of his life tirelessly working to fight the fever spreading throughout the Red Keep and beyond. Even today, many maesters still believe that Tyland Lannister's swift actions in locking down King's Landing and the Red Keep itself saved thousands of lives by preventing the fever from spreading to the interior of Westeros. In fact, Sir Tyland Lannister's actions would be used as a precedent to this day when dealing with situations such as pestilence and fever. Septon Eustace was with him when he died, as was the boy king that he had served. The young King Aegon took his hand as he breathed his last. Sir Tyland had never been beloved by many lords or small folk alike. After the death of Queen Rhaenyra, he'd urged Aegon II to put her son, Aegon III, to death, and certain blacks hated him for that and would never let that go, no matter what good Tyland Lannister would go on to do. Yet after the death of Aegon II, despite his mutilation and torture at the orders of Rhaenyra, he'd remained to serve her son Aegon III, with no ill will towards the boy. Despite the fears of many of the blacks, he would serve loyally as Hand, and certain Greens hated him for that too. Coming second from his mother's womb, and a few heartbeats after his twin brother Jason had denied him the glory of lordship and the gold of Casterly Rock, leaving Sir Tyland to make his own place in the world, and that he did. Because he never married or fathered any children, there were few left to mourn him when he was carried off. To the surprise of some, it seemed the boy king Aegon III mourned the loss of Tyland more than most of the lords in the Red Keep. After his torture, The veil he wore to conceal his disfigured face gave rise to tales that the visage underneath was monstrous and evil. Some called him a craven for keeping Westeros out of the Daughters' War and doing so little to curb the Greyjoys in the West. However, with hindsight, we can now look back at his actions as trying to maintain the fragile peace struck after the Dance of the Dragons. By moving 3/4 of the crown's gold from King's Landing whilst Aegon II's Master of Coin, Tyland Lannister had sowed the seeds of Queen Rhaenyra's downfall, a stroke of cunning that would in the end cost him his eyes, his ears, and his health, and cost the Queen her throne and her very life. Yet it must be said that he served Rhaenyra's son well and faithfully as hand, while at the time Tyland Lannister may have seemed a footnote in the histories of the Seven Kingdoms. We now look back in retrospect and see the true impact he had during his life. His actions alone dictated the outcome of the Dance of the Dragons and the eventual fates of both Aegon II and Rhaenyra. He was pivotal in the stabilising of the realm during the early days of the rule of Aegon III. Without his cool head and political neutrality, it is likely, all but inevitable, that Westeros would have been ravaged by another civil war. And finally, in his death, he was able to prevent a deadly fever from spreading throughout Westeros, doubtlessly saving many lives. Regardless of your view and opinion of Sir Tyland Lannister, his actions during the dance and the regency earned him his deserved place in the history books.